Yeah, so you helped 700 Ukrainians find their way to Canada.
We helped like 11,000 people. We believe that within our lifetime, the North Korean regime will fall. I was like auditing a large gold corporation. You know, by night, I was sending USB keys into North Korea. And I bought 6 pigeons from a Pakistani man in North York.
Oh my God.
We owe a bit of a thank you to President Trump. I have never seen this degree of patriotism and solidarity in Canada ever. We run the risk of kind of repeating this story of being a birthplace of invention and not fostering and scaling innovation.
How can we change it?
By being bold. No, I sleep very little. I sleep 4 to 5 hours a day.
Actually?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, I drink a lot of caffeine, don't have a wife and kids, so I can devote all my time to these babies.
How would you describe yourself to somebody?
I describe myself as a bit of a platypus if I had to.
Nice.
Because I'm made up of a little unusual parts, so all these kind of contradictions. So like in high school, I was like president of the student council, but I was also captain of the debate and the football team. People think I'm Latino, but I'm actually Chinese Ukrainian. People look at me and they think, oh, that guy is definitely an accountant, but also an accountant who likes to paint puns of tech founders as animals.
Nice.
So like, I'm just all these kind of contradictions, but fundamentally, like the way, I think the common denominator for my life has been, you know, really leading with purpose, putting a technology angle to things, and then try to lead from the front, like lead by example, not afraid to get my hands dirty, and really kind of take action when I see something that's calling to me. I mean, I'm the child of 2 teachers, and so on top of my actual homework, I had more homework. And my dad, for example, like he's a bit of an inventor on the side. He had a few patents. So I'd always been, you know, had a curious mind, had always been interested in technology. My dad kind of imbued that. That's when he brought home the first computer. So, you know, technology has always been this kind of, I think it's a tool to kind of amplify like the human experience. Yeah.
What did you study in university?
I went to the University of Toronto. I studied finance and economics. It's a bit of an assembly line for chartered accountants, but that was actually helpful because I graduated in 2008 during the global financial crisis. So
Perfect.
We were the only ones with jobs still outstanding once we graduated. So I guess we were lucky for that. Actually, right out of university was when I got involved with Voice, which was the North Korean human rights and refugee organization. So at the same time, I was like auditing a large, you know, gold corporation. You know, by night, I was running this organization, sending USB keys into North Korea or helping North Koreans kind of learn the kind of halls of democracy.
Yeah, that's a perfect segue. So tell me about what Project E is.
So when I was executive director of Voice, we got to interact with a lot of North Korean defectors. And what Project E really was really trying to unplug people from the matrix. Since the founding of North Korea, the regime has constructed this kind of reality for its people, not only of like, you know, how lucky they are and how prosperous they are in their country, and how evil and kind of in despair the rest of the world was. And they had maintained this kind of illusion for decades, from Kim Il-sung all the way to, you know, today even. There is no internet there. Mm-hmm. So when we spoke to defectors, like one of the kind of pivot points for them, for what took them over the edge to decide to cross that border, risk their life to escape to freedom, it was oftentimes exposure to this information from the outside world. With Project E, on a USB key, we included all of Wikipedia on it. We had other media like books, you know, information about the North Korean famine, which really undermined kind of the story of the strength of the regime, where, you know, they estimate 1 million North Koreans died. There was even some, you know, K-pop and stuff like that on that. Again, these are things that help them realize like, whoa, I've been told a lie my whole life, and there is a better life for me out there. And so we were trying to essentially create these offline internets throughout North Korea.
Right, because North Korea has their own, it's more of a very controlled intranet.
Yeah.
And then you are using these USBs to kind of give honestly Web 1.0 intranets for people to discover the lies or discover the truths of what it really is being in North Korea.
Sometimes we're asked, like, why is it a USB key? Well, the first actual media that people were using to get this information in were DVDs. North Korean regime got very, clever about this because what they would do is they knew people were watching these illegal DVDs, and they would shut off the power in these apartment blocks because these DVD players, once the power's off, the DVD's stuck in there. And so they would catch people with these DVDs, whereas with a USB key, you can, unplug it, throw it in your fireplace, chuck it out a window, do whatever, right? So you can be safe. So the USB key was something that was able to essentially, empower them to make these decisions, these important decisions.
So you download Wikipedia onto a USB key from your computer, and then how does it get into the hands of a North Korean? Like, walk me through that process.
Yeah, so we partnered with another defector organization who had operations in China. China had trade with North Korea. And so within these kind of shipments that went into North Korea, were these USB keys that were then distributed through a network in North Korea itself.
How did Project E come about? Like, how did your involvement come about? Did you decide, I want to do this? Did you join a team?
Yeah, so I actually joined Han Voice. It was an organization that was started by a few Korean Canadian lawyers, and I ended up joining the team. Within a year, I became the executive director. And actually, where we started was empowering North Korean defectors with this project we called the Pioneers Project, where we took North Korean defectors and actually got them internships with members of parliament, senators, because the thesis was that, we believe that within our lifetime, the North Korean regime will fall. And we wanted to really empower that generation of leaders who will go back to North Korea and help, install democracy, and will have that experience having walked the halls of power of Canadian Parliament. So it started with that. And then, as we spoke to them about, learned more about what motivated you to leave, many of them did so at, great personal risk. And they know people who it didn't turn out as well as it did for them. So that kind of idea came from speaking to them, where they said, it was when I saw, an illegal DVD, or when I read this book or something like that, or I met someone in the prison camp who told me when he went to China that he saw that the world was very different than what we'd been told. So they inspired that idea.
Was there ever any speculation about even a North Korean mole?
So these would have been defectors who had already left the country and essentially had escaped to South Korea. And in South Korea, there's this ministry called the Ministry of Reunification, or of Unification. They have a whole program called Hanawan, which once they get to South Korea, they kind of the intelligence agency there debriefs them and kind of vets them. We had gone with the assumption that they had been screened by them. And then obviously when they come here, there's also other kind of screenings. But we were asked that exact same question when the first pioneer and I testified before the House Committee on Human Rights. The first question they ask is, how do we know that these guys aren't just here to, spy on us? And it's a legit question. And we were like, it's not our job, unfortunately. We're not an intelligence agency. We also were working with the federal government to find a pathway to let Canada take and privately sponsor North Korean refugees, because they usually end up in Thailand. And then in Thailand, they have to decide where they want to get deported to. Because that's the only safe country kind of that's directly out of North Korea that won't send them back to North Korea. Because if they get caught in China, Laos, any place like that, they get sent back to North Korea, and that's kind of end of the story for them.
Yeah. Why were you interested in doing this? Like, what sparked that inspiration?
My grandfather, so my other side that's Ukrainian, my grandfather was in a camp during the Second World War, because Ukrainians were treated very much the same as the other kind of persecuted classes. And I just remember that covenant of never again. The guys at Han Voice were talking about how there were these modern day concentration camps where literally they were doing experimentations on people. They were starving them, seeing the accounts and stuff like that, even some of the kind of smuggled video. Like, I was like, what happened to this never again covenant? To me, it was like, okay, this is happening today. I can't, attend this seminar and then leave and go home and go about my life. So for 5 years, I was executive director of that organization.
Yeah, very soon after you started Pathfinders for Ukraine. So tell me about that.
In 2022, the Russians had started to mobilize around Ukraine under the guise of a military exercise. Now, obviously, the kind of first invasion happened in 2017 in the eastern part of Ukraine, but there was this kind of rumor that, Russia might invade, but they might be just doing intimidation exercises on the border. I had a really bad feeling about it. And it started to kind of affect me in my work. Like, I was living in Amsterdam at the time. I was a director at KPMG in their consulting practice. I just became really distracted. And then on February 24th, 2022, when the full-scale invasion happened, I submitted my resignation.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
And then 10 days later, I was on a plane to Poland because you can't fly into Ukraine at that point. And then from there went, pretty much from Warsaw to the border. And by that time, the first wave of Ukrainians that were being displaced from the east were arriving at the Polish border. So I saw some of the first trains of those folks that were coming right out of the invasion, fleeing to safety in Poland. And then from there, was really trying to figure the startup guy in me, trying to, and also the consultant in me, trying to understand the journey and where are the kind of pain points and stuff like that. That's what eventually led to the formation of Pathfinders for Ukraine when Canada announced its emergency visa program for war-displaced Ukrainians, which happened about 3 weeks later.
Yeah, so you helped 700 Ukrainians find their way to Canada, and you were in the Warsaw station.
Yeah, we got about 700 onto planes. So not only did we partner with organizations that were flying aid in, we got people on the way out. We also got a lot of private sponsorships to get people onto planes. And I think really impactfully, being headquartered out of Warsaw Central Station, it was like the nexus of where all the war-displaced Ukrainians were coming from when they left Ukraine and got into Poland. So we set up a Canada desk, and we helped 11,000 people because we had hundreds of people coming every day. And there were 1.2 million Ukrainians applied for that visa to come to Canada. It was the most popular program of any country. And about 300,000 actually arrived. There was no kind of organization that was on the ground there helping people, make that next step. And we were next to the Brits. We were at other shelters where there was 12 other countries. So, Canada was a really kind of interesting option, just given the history of Ukraine and Canada.
Yeah. Take me back to the day of what you were seeing and what you were feeling in that moment.
When I was in the hotels, there were all these other people, combinations of mercenaries, so people who were there to join the Foreign Legion, smugglers. There were people who were smuggling in helmets, vests, weapons into Ukraine to help out the Ukrainian army. There were journalists, there were humanitarians, spies and intelligence people around.
And then there was Randall.
Yeah, and then there was me and we were, I got to meet all these interesting people. So that was a really interesting time because it wasn't clear what were the kind of options for, A, helping, and then B, there were no clear options for what to do with all these Ukrainians. And, at one point, Poland, I think, took on 800,000 or more.
Because they were the closest.
They were
makes sense,
exactly
geographically.
Exactly. And, the first people that could leave were primarily the elderly and women and their children. They looked like my mom, my aunts, my grandparents, and I had to pause because it was so difficult to see because I just imagined them in those circumstances. The Polish people were incredibly generous. They were, there were women leaving carriages, empty carriages at the train stations. It was incredibly chaotic in the beginning. And then when the Canadian government came up with the emergency visa program, again, we saw that there was a lot of interest, not a lot of guidance for these folks, and not all of them speak English. And so we essentially were able to eventually set up in Warsaw Central Station. So there are these kind of islands within the station that were once coffee shops turned into these like essentially these information desks. So some desks were showing them where to get to shelters within Warsaw. Others were the different country desks. Other were medical aid. They set up in one of the waiting rooms like this children's kind of daycare center. Like it turned into this kind of makeshift like aid center. And it was this hub of humanitarian aid from people from everywhere. What was really kind of critical and I think gratifying was we had these people I call them hop the desk Ukrainians. So these would be Ukrainians that we helped get their kind of emergency visa and all that. And then the next day they would show up, put on a vest, and then come around and volunteer with us.
Amazing.
And usually they're the ones who spoke fluent English and Ukrainian or Russian, and they were able to help their fellow people. And that to me was like they were the most critical part of our organization. And B, like it was just so like encouraging to see them wanting to help their own people amidst their own kind of chaos and trauma and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah.
And you facilitated some of that.
Yeah, we trained them on like what is the kind of process and programs and stuff like that. We built kind of tools and information. We even built, the tech guy in me built an app, of course, which helped them decide which city to go to. So we translated all the jobs codes, 650 of them or so, into Ukrainian for the first time. Took the jobs data at the city level to figure out which city they should go to, because picking a job is an important factor in deciding where you're going to live. Because when we asked them, where you want to go? They all said Toronto. And I'm like, you got family or a job there? And they're like, no, it's the only city I know. We're like, well, it's not necessarily the best option for you. So yeah, we built stuff that really helped people hopefully make informed decisions. And again, what was really gratifying is to see some of these people when I finally came back to Canada, resettling here and really thriving, working great jobs, sending kids to school where some of them tell me that their English and French is better than their Ukrainian now. Like they're really integrating. And so our kind of current fight is to help give them a pathway to permanent residence, because some of these folks have been displaced maybe 6 or 7 times since that first invasion. They could have easily gone to Germany or UK or Netherlands. The supports were much more generous there. They made a conscious decision to start a new life in Canada, and we really wanted to give them that option to live in peace and prosperity here.
Did you run into any struggles in the North Korean or Ukrainian ventures?
Is a challenge because there's no playbook for any of this stuff. So you got to kind of figure out as you go along. But again, being a startup founder, being consulting, you kind of like are trained to deal in ambiguity. And I think what was most helpful was, I try to really, when I was in healthcare, I tried to walk the patient journey, understand every touch point. That's what I did with the Ukrainian stuff. So I went across to Ukraine. I walked across the border. I slept on the shelter floors. I went to the train stations. I wanted to really understand what was the journey, where were the struggles, where's the kind of question marks where they don't know where to go or what to do. That's where we essentially had set up, and that's why we were able to be so accessible to those war displaced Ukrainians.
How would you define something or somebody
Yeah.
as being bold?
Being bold is, to me, about leading with your heart rather than with your head. A lot of times we are presented with these opportunities and we try to rationalize them. We try to put them into cost benefit, probabilistically, what's the outcome, blah, blah, blah. And it often, because we get more kind of, I guess, risk averse as we get older, you often shut yourself down from these opportunities. I didn't do it because it made sense or I saw a real benefit or it was certainly not the most profitable option. And it wasn't necessarily it was definitely not the safest option either. But my heart told me that it was something that was important, that it was in honor of my grandparents or my parents. And so that's what I followed. So you have to kind of let your heart override your head in those circumstances. And I think that's what being bold generally is.
I agree.
I don't think I do it for this, but I almost feel like the nonprofit stuff is like atoning, I guess, for the corporate stuff. It's the same reason I do the painting is because I feel like when I paint, I get to use a muscle that I never get to use in my kind of tech life. So,
What's the coolest thing that you think you've painted?
so I have a series that is unpublished. I may own NFT someday, called Beasts of the Valley, and it's a intersection of three things that I love, which is tech, animals, and dad jokes, like puns.
Okay.
So it's a series of all these tech founders as animals based on their names. So I've got like Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, the bee, Elon Musk, he's an eel.
Nice.
Yeah, so I've got a whole I have probably like 30 of these.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
From all of your experience with finance, tech, and government, what is emerging out of Canada that you think Canadians or the world should know about?
Well, I think first, like to some degree, we owe a bit of a thank you to President Trump, because I have never seen this degree of patriotism and solidarity in Canada ever.
For sure.
And sometimes these like external evil forces help mobilize, your country, right? We saw that in the US after 9/11. We've seen that in the world wars where countries, people come together. And it's been really great to see like these different initiatives come up and this real kind of sense from small business owners to, consumers to the big corporations kind of talking about, being proud of being made in Canada. People often forget that Canada is a great birthplace of invention. So you can go all the way back to, insulin, at the University of Toronto, eventually got sold to Eli Lilly in the United States because they were able to commercialize it. The Avro Aero was, the, supersonic jet of its time, which was scrapped due to, government reasons. Fast forward to, BlackBerry was the leading kind of mobile phone. Again, mismanagement, capital issues killed that kind of made in Canada invention. Ethereum, born, not too far from where we are right now.
Oh, wow. Okay.
At a Bitcoin meetup on Bloor Street.
I had no idea.
Yeah. The white paper was presented there by Vitalik, but because of the regulatory environments, they essentially moved over, to Europe and eventually settled the foundation in Switzerland. We run the risk of kind of repeating this story of being a birthplace of invention and not of fostering and scaling innovation. And there's many reasons for that. Everything from the ability to attract and form capital here, so with tax and investment policy, to what's the kind of regulation that we create. We tend to be a bit more kind of conservative, and so that's obviously stifled innovation. We see people being pushed to other countries like the UAE and Singapore and Hong Kong, the States obviously, and then finally, like, how do we kind of fund and support our innovators so that we're giving funding to the people that are true builders here, rather than large corporations that are based overseas that are receiving innovation dollars, everything from Shred to there's IP that we're funding out of our own AI institutes that are actually owned by Uber, Disney, Google, like all these other big corporations. If Canada wants to truly be a leader when it comes to technology, it needs to be bold. It needs to plant that flag, and it can't kind of limp in with these policies. We were asked in NorthstarDAO, because we're a policy and advocacy organization for grassroots founders. They asked us, we had members of parliament ask us, should we just roll back the changes to the capital gains policy? And we said that, no, tear it down. Create, the best place to form capital. Make it so that it's better than the US's policy when it comes to people who invest in early stage startups. That's the way that we have to win. You have to be bold. You can't limp in this kind of global tech environment. Tech knows no borders, so the winner does take all. So if you really want to kind of win, you have to be bold.
Why do you think we're so conservative in Canada? I have a friend that raised $200K here in Toronto and then had to move to the States for a promise of $2 million. So that's 10x. Is it because the population in the States and the market is 10x, or is it just more of a monetary mindset and policy?
I think there's different kind of hypotheses as to why. I mean, you can even look at how the United States versus Canada was formed. The United States is technically a entrepreneurial project unto itself, right?
Yeah.
The Pilgrims
Yeah.
funded their own journey because they weren't happy with the conditions in the United Kingdom. And so they said, we're going to take a boat, we're going to float over. I don't know where we're going to land, but we're going to start the startup that was the United States, or the original Jamestown. Canada was kind of more formed. And when I was in university, I wrote a paper on this for economics called In Cod We Trust, which was about the cod industry and how it really led to settlement of Canada. And that was because the British didn't have salt to cure and dry all the cod that they were catching. So they had to dry it on land. So that's what started some of the colonies in the East.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So, when it comes to one country that's founded out of a spirit of we are starting anew and we're going to build, a society that we want, versus the one that's kind of oh, we're just setting up a colony to kind of help feed another colony, right? This conservatism can be good too, right? So think about the global financial crisis, how we were not so heavily impacted by it like the United States was, where those dominoes were collapsing from Bear Stearns to Lehman and things like that. Mm-hmm. We didn't see that happen in Canada. And partly that's thanks to the conservatism of our capital reserve requirements and stuff like that, which is far greater than the US.
Yep.
Just in my observation from investors, when you look at the VCs here in Canada, many of them get involved in later stages or want to be post-product, post-revenue. And by that point, how much risk are you really taking on? Whereas in the United States, they're far more willing to do that, to roll the dice on that. Part of that is the tax and investment policy. In a qualified small business stock, you can essentially get $10 million of cap gains exemption per investment. And in Canada, we're talking about a 1.25 million, cap gains lifetime exemption. So again, policy is somewhat of a product of your culture, but also you can change that.
How can we change it?
By being bold. and really it is so for example, when we see these countries like the UAE pop up, when it comes to Web3, for example, it's become a new gravitational center for Web3. It didn't happen naturally. They didn't find it in the ground like they did the oil and all that. But the leadership there said, we know that oil can't be our future. And so we need to start investing for the future. And they really believed in Web3 technology, so blockchain and all that other stuff. And so they committed $1.2 billion to investing in both infrastructure to bring startups there. They formed capital to specifically invest in those things. So that's an artificial way of creating an ecosystem, an innovation ecosystem. Here in Canada, we have great founders and we've got community, but we kind of lack the capital and the regulations. So what those guys did is the inverse of that, right? They created friendly regulations and dropped a whole lot of capital, and then the communities and the founders followed. What if we kind of took those approaches that these small countries like Singapore, Israel, the UAE have done to become real powerhouses when it comes to technology and innovation, and apply it here? Because we're still ultimately a 40 million person country who is trying to play against a really big competitive neighbor. So have you played poker before?
Of course.
Okay. And have you heard of the madman strategy in poker?
Enlighten me.
So it's pretty much not looking at your hand, playing completely irrationally, having no correlation between your betting and the strength of your hand and anything like that. Kim Jong-il, that's essentially what he employed, especially in the kind of 2000s, when he was creating all that chaos around the nuclear testing, sending missiles over Japan and stuff like that. People believe that he was so willing to risk his own life and his own regime's life that it became really hard to negotiate against him. And so he got a lot of concessions out of that. And to some degree, I think Trump is playing a madman strategy.
I was going to say the same thing.
Yeah, and where it's so hard, it's because if you try to put rationalism against a madman strategy, you will almost always lose. I kind of learned this from seeing the World War II movies where Patton would read the books about Rommel, about his strategies, because then you get into the mind of your enemy.
Yes.
So I actually bought a copy of The Art of the Deal, and a long time ago I had bought and read The Art of War by Sun Tzu.
Yes.
And that's what I feel like we're kind of seeing play out right now, is like China on one side playing the art of war and Trump playing the art of the deal. I would say they're kind of like incompatible strategies.
For sure.
Yeah. And what's interesting, being half Chinese, like in China, they think in centuries, right? If you think about like the Belt and Road Initiative and like investing in infrastructure in Africa and in Southeast Asia.
Yeah, for the next 100, 200 years.
Yeah, they've essentially set themselves up like and integrate themselves into those societies. Whereas in the West, we tend to think in like 4-year election cycles, right? So how do you play a strategy when you're thinking in re-election in 4 years from now versus a guy who's playing, a 100-year game? You're going to lose in that too. So it'll be interesting to see like how this all plays out in the short and the long run. But there's certainly, just having come back from Southeast Asia, there's a very different energy and spirit there. There may be new centers of gravity that emerge.
I think we're already seeing that.
Yeah.
Talk to me about the Pigeons.
Did you ever take psychology?
Yes.
Do you remember B.F. Skinner? Well, B.F. Skinner, he's like the father of operant conditioning. So that's about positive and negative reinforcement. The two animals that he trained, like when he was trying to demonstrate operant conditioning, were pigeons and rats, which are like the two most hated animals probably on the planet.
Yeah, vermins.
Yeah, like, they call pigeons rats with wings. So, but they're everywhere, right? And I just thought it was so interesting because he had the Skinner box, which essentially for pigeons would give them a food pellet if they pecked a wheel at the right color. The number one most prevalent plastic in the ocean is cigarette butts, because in the cigarette butts there's this kind of fiber called cellulose acetate, and it makes sense because people smoke, throw it on the road, goes into the sewer goes out, blah blah blah, right? Like at one point these two facts collided, so I was like, what if we could do something here? So I went on Kijiji and I bought 6 pigeons.
You bought 6 pigeons.
I bought 6 pigeons from a Pakistani man in North York.
Oh my God.
And
did he get them off the street, or were they like bred to do something?
They were technically racer pigeons. And
Okay.
the way I learned this is because when I tried letting the first 2 go, they flew directly north back to him.
Wow. So you bought them back.
It's a good business model.
Yeah.
Yeah, he gets instant returns and he doesn't have to give me the money back.
Amazing.
But with the remaining 4, I adapted a Skinner box, which allowed a pigeon to pick up a cigarette butt, put it into a receptacle, and if the receptacle detected a cigarette butt, it would give them a food pellet. And then my goal was then to let them free to go pick them up off the street and then put them in the bin, so that we could potentially put these bins on, like, let's say, rooftops of buildings and stuff like that.
Idea, yeah.
And I learned that from the city, like cigarette butt removal is like one of the most expensive things for street cleaning. Like that's one of the primary costs for them. So the marginal cost of a food pellet is like fractions of a cent. This costs a lot. It's a ton of plastic in the ocean. I'm like, and pigeons are the most prevalent bird on Earth. They're highly scalable in startup terms.
Yeah.
There's a franchise in every city. Eventually, over time, though, as I couldn't chain the behaviors. I could get them to put the cigarette butt in the bin. I couldn't get them to fly out and then come back with it. So I eventually lost them all. They which was kind of good because they were very messy. It was becoming hard to explain to people, especially on dates. They're like, "You got pigeons on your?"
Oh, you're a bird guy.
Yeah, and kind of avian flu was, I think, like 2 or 3 years before. So yeah, it wasn't the most marketable thing, but I was hoping it was going to be my TED Talk.
I mean, we could try again.
Hey,
Want to do a Kickstarter?
Yes, Kickstarter. Who wants to fund the? It was called To Feather Research Labs because we worked to feather.
Nice.
Together. Yeah,
that's amazing. That's so funny. Anything else you want to add or touch on?
What's the impetus behind Be Bold?
I love telling stories, and that kind of came from doing a short documentary of my Opa, who escaped Estonia in 1944. His father worked for the Estonian Home Guard and fabricated his birth certificate to make him 16 instead of 17 so he wouldn't be drafted into the German army. Some of his family members decided to leave, and others, unfortunately, were killed. But he decided to leave in 1944. And I filmed him talk about his childhood and that escape. And I learned more filming him in 4 hours than I knew or had learned at the time 25 years of knowing him.
Right.
Because he just didn't talk about that.
Right.
He would much rather talk about the ice cream that was on sale at Fortino's.
Yeah.
He didn't want to remember or talk about the traumas that he went through in uprooting himself and building a sailboat and sailing to Sweden and biking 250 kilometers to the nearest port and smuggling people as a seaman from different countries just to give them new lives. Like that was all scary to him. Walking away from that interview and doing the short documentary, I quickly realized that everybody has a story.
Yeah.
And I've always been interested in stories, which is kind of why I started out in the film industry and have now gone on to videography, and I'm now starting this. Given the current political and cultural climate of Canadians finding their national identity, I think now so more than ever, it's important to talk about the bold Canadian stories and then how Canada as a nation and as a people can be bold and how we can continue that not just this year or next year, but in our 100 years to come.
100%.
I want to hear people's bold stories, and then I want to live my own bold stories. And I have the little maple leaf as the O because we're starting off with the Canadian chapter.
Right.
And then after 100 bold Canadian stories, maybe we do go international. But right now I really want to focus on Canada and our country and our
Yeah. It's great timing.
Yeah. I know when we previously talked, you said that you don't wear T-shirts out in public.
Not often.
At all?
I do every now and then.
Every now and then.
Yeah, to
But, like,
prove my humanity.
Yeah, fair. Yeah. Because I said, how about you wear something casual to this interview? And you're like, I will.
I'm wearing sneakers.
This is for you. It is a Be Bold T-shirt. Same
Nice.
one I'm wearing.
Oh, the
and
model.
Yep. And I'm hoping that it can just be a reminder every once in a while when you're looking at yourself in the mirror to continue to be bold.
Be bold, be bald.
Be bold, be bald. Perfect. That was relatively painless.
That was great.